Hey there! I hope everybody's doing well. I recently reviewed this book, J.A. Henckels' Knives by Neil Punchard, which, by the way, is an excellent book if you are at all interested in fine vintage knives, especially from Germany, or specifically Henckels knives. You really ought to buy a copy. I'll put the link to a website where you can purchase a copy in the description box below. I really recommend this book. But since I did that review, I've been able to acquire a couple of Henckels Sportsman's or camping or Swiss Army style knives. One a little older from the 1930s to 1950s, and one a little younger from the late 60s or early 70s. And so I'll start by showing you this one, which is a model 1160. And as you can see, it is an equal-ended 6-blade utility knife, and it's 91 millimeters in length, so it's about the same size as a Swiss Army knife. But unlike a Swiss Army knife, it's built like a traditional pocket knife. So instead of being a shadow knife with just fiber or plastic scales, this knife has nickel silver bolsters and pinned on covers, which in this case are genuine stag. So it's kind of an upscale version of an old Swiss Army knife, which I think is really great. I'd seen these before. I'd actually bid on one in the past and didn't get it, but I always kind of had my eyes out for one of these, and I actually bought this one before the book came. These are detailed in the book. On page 65, you can see the author, Neil Punchard, has some pictured here, sort of a lineup of them, I guess, in chronological order. The one I'm getting ready to show you is here in the middle. It's identical to this knife, except this knife has a little lighter stag covers and no bail. As a matter of fact, I had never really seen one with a bail in pictures or online until I saw this one, and when I purchased it, I started kind of worrying. I thought, well, what's up with that? I sure hope it's kosher. And when I got the book, I was really happy to see that it is, because there's a catalog cut or image from a 1956 Henckels catalog here in the book, which shows my knife exactly. It's the exact same knife with the bail and the stag covers. Is given as the model 1160. And it's really hard to read because it's so small, but it says genuine stag scales, and then they call it the Sportsman's knife. And you can see here that back in 1956 it cost $10.45, which would seem like a real bargain today, but I guess back then that was probably a premium price. So let me do this. Let me turn my lights around. So, I've got them turned away now so they don't glare on the book. But let me turn the lights around and zoom in a little bit, and we'll take a closer look at the knife. Okay, so I think that's better, and we can see those stag covers a lot better here. You can see how dark they are, but they are full of character, and they look great. They're not too thick, so the knife remains slender. Again, it's 91 millimeters, so that puts it right between 3.5 and 3 5/8 inches. Nickel silver bolsters, nickel silver pins, nickel silver bail, no shield, but nickel silver liners, which I really like. I've said this before in the past, I just like it when a knife is all one metal. For some reason, it just kind of ties it all together. And I don't know if nickel silver is better than brass for liners. You sometimes see it on more premium knives. I do think it does not corrode or tarnish quite as quickly. But I just like the look when everything kind of ties together. Now this knife is carbon steel. Again, the author of the Henckels book, Neil Punchard, dates this knife somewhere between the 1930s and 50s. They certainly could have put stainless steel on it during that time, but it's just that more classic carbon steel. Again, 6 blades, so here is the screwdriver cap lifter. It's where you would expect it to be on a Swiss Army style knife. Oh, one thing I want to show, it's not real clear on this tool, but all the tools are stamped, and We might have to do super zoom with this, but screwdriver cap lifter has the little Zwilling or Twins logo, and underneath says Germany, even though that's kind of worn off there. You can see it more clearly on the old style can opener. If I can remember the side. Yeah, let's do this. There you can see the Twins and Germany. This knife has a pen blade, and its stamp is like the main blade. It is J.A. Henckels, Germany, and this is really the most common tang stamp for Henckels pocket knives. They used this from the early 1900s all the way up through when Boker began making knives for Henckels, and through that period, so I guess probably up to about 2005. Again, the Twins there, and then J.A. Henckels, and then underneath Germany. Now you also see that J.A. Henckels Zolligen, another tang stamp, very similar, that was used throughout the 1900s as well. But these tools are in good shape. They're all full, unbroken. You know, just light scratches from normal use. They all have pretty good snap. Here's the main blade. It's a long, slender spear point blade. Reminds me a lot of a Swiss Army knife. And again, here's that tang stamp. J.A. Henckels, Germany, and nothing on the reverse here. And then of course the back tools, you have fluted or grooved corkscrew. This one is 4 turns, and this gives us a look at those nickel silver liners. And I saved the best for last, or the worst for last. This is the European style awl. So here you can see you've got this 3-sided awl, one side curved, 2 sides flat, cut out in the scale. Looks a lot like an early Elsener or Victorinox Swiss Army knife. But this one actually has a sewing eye and a nail nick drilled into it, which you don't see very often. It's pretty unusual. So that's the cool part, that's the good part. Here's the bad part. It's absolutely impossible to open it with your thumbnail. And I mean absolutely impossible. You can't even get your nail under the edge of the tool. It's spring tension down there so tight and so close you can't get a nail in there, and they've not cut the nail nick big enough to actually get that tool open. I think that's kind of weird, the way they oriented it with the curved side up here where you would put your nail, because all other nail nicks are just the opposite. The flat side is at the top where you stick your nail under. See? And that allows you to pull the tool up. I've checked other knives, they're all oriented like this, but some of them look like they're cut a little bigger. So this one might have been just cut a little too small. So I actually have to use a nail nick tool to get this open, and then sometimes I can't even do that. There you go. It's a fine tool once you get it open. Here you can see the sewing eye, and it's very pointy, very sharp at the point. It's not sharpened on the sides so much, just good square edges, but not sharpened like a blade. So it's really not like a drill or an awl as much as it is a punch. But yeah, just a little odd. That's a shame I can't get that one open, but otherwise it's a great knife. And that's the model 1160. Again, they're Sportsman's knife from somewhere in the 1930s to the 1950s. Okay, the next sack style Henckels that I have to show you looks a lot more like a Victorinox or a Winger. Here we have another 6-bladed equal end utility knife, but this one is in the shadow knife construction with these plastic scales. And I do believe that's Celador or something very similar, because it's very similar to the plastic that you would find on a Victorinox. I don't believe Celador was really a proprietary material of Victorinox's. But this knife is in stainless steel. It has aluminum liners. You can see that it has exposed pins, ground flush, and here's a nickel silver inlay of the Zwillings or Twins logo. Now this was the last Swiss Army knife style knife that Henckels made themselves. It dates from the late 60s or early 70s. And I'm basing that on some information in the J.A. Henckels book. This knife specifically is not pictured in the book, but a similar one is on page 34. Here you can see a knife with the same red plastic scales, exposed rivets, and the same Twins inlay. And the author states that this knife dates from the late 60s to the early 70s and was one of the last Henckels made pocket knives. So let me just run you through the knife and show you the similarities and differences to Victorinox's and Wingers. The first thing I want to show you is the can opener, because it's very much different than a Winger or Victorinox. This is Henckels' style of can opener on this knife, and I think it's very interesting because it has a sharpened edge here like a chisel, and I imagine that's for stripping or cutting any object you can get down in there, like a wire or rope or string. Sharpened on the front edge, it's very pointed. I've not tried it to open a can with it yet. I've not tried opening a can, but I'm sure it would be very effective. And then on the opposite end is a screwdriver, cap lifter, wire stripper, bender, and there are no markings on these two blades. Knife has good spring tension. The knife's in really good shape. Here you're going to see another difference, and that is, instead of a pen blade, this knife has a long, fine screwdriver, much like a Alox technician would have. And I know they did make these knives with pen blades here, so I guess this was just a variation you could get. And then the main blade is the only blade really that has any markings on it. First of all, it's just a long, slender spear point blade with a crescent nail nick. It reminds me a lot of a Victorinox. Again, this knife is in stainless steel. And the tang stamp is a little different on this knife. Again, it shows the Twins logo, but underneath it says Friador, or Friador, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it is F-R-I-O-D-U-R, and then underneath that Inox, short for inoxidable, the French word for stainless steel. Friador, or Friador, was Henckels' proprietary or patented process for ice hardening their stainless steel. They came up with this in 1939, and they used it heavily in their marketing, claiming that it gave their steel superior properties. And on the reverse of the tang, we see Zwillingswerk, Germany, Twins work, Germany. And then on the back we have, of course, a corkscrew. This one actually is 5 turns, and it is grooved. Here you can see those aluminum liners. And then we have a punch. And this is that flat hidden punch. It's very much like a Victorinox. It does not have a sharpened cutting edge, so I'm really kind of calling it a punch rather than an awl. I thought it would be interesting to compare this to a Victorinox from the same time period, so I pulled this one out, and the first thing you notice is that the Celador scales are quite a different color. This is a brighter red, of course a darker red. This is more reminiscent of a very older Victorinox, like, you know, from when they first came out with these scales in 37. They had a dark red color like that. At some point in time they brightened them up. This knife is actually a little longer. This is, Victorinox's full-size knives are 91 millimeters. At first I thought this was 91 millimeters until I held it up here. And so then I got my calipers and I measured it, and it's 89.5 millimeters, which is an odd size, but it comes out to exactly 3.5 inches. So it's kind of odd, but I think they probably built it to that standard rather than to the millimeter standard. Kind of strange for a European knife to be right at 3.5 inches and something odd like 89.5 millimeters, but there it is. So this knife has a bail. That was optional on the Victorinox at the time. This one does not. Perhaps it was also optional on the Henckels knives. I don't know. The biggest difference, I think, or a few of the differences, is that by 1951 Victorinox was using this patented forward action can opener with the small screwdriver on the front, and we've seen how different that screwdriver is. Can opener. Both of the knives have aluminum liners. Victorinox also went to aluminum liners in 1951, but also in 1957 Victorinox started hiding their rivets, and of course with the Henckels knife the construction is still exposed rivets. And then, of course, in 1961, that's why I pulled out this knife. Victorinox, whoops, if I can find the nail nick on it. Victorinox gave up the European awl exposed here with a cutout in the scale for the flat, sharpened reamer that folded away in the back here. And we've seen how similar this one is. And of course this knife is just your basic standard, like a Spartan without scale tools, and so it carries a pen blade in this position. At this point in time it was a clip point pen blade, and of course we've seen the screwdriver on this knife. So Henckels quit making their own pocket knives in 1975, but they continued to sell Swiss Army knife pocket knives under their brand for quite a while. In the 80s, they had those type of knives made by someone in Brazil, and they called that line of knife J.A. Henckels International. Here's a catalog image from 1983 in the J.A. Henckels book showing the Swiss Army knife style knives that were made in Brazil. And you can see some differences right away. Number one, the can opener is a safety style can opener. But these knives had a faux wood scale, and instead of the twins logo, the logo was a single figure holding a staff, and it's read underneath J.A. Henckels International. And I believe those were just imprinted on the scale. And then by the 90s, or at least by 1992, Henckels was using Victorinox to make their Swiss Army style knives. And here you can see one pictured in the book. It looks like a Ranger with a metal saw and wood saw and scissors. Does not have as many back tools, however. Here you can see we're back to the twins logo, and I believe it says Zwilling J.A. Henckels. Again, an imprint. But here are a couple of catalog pages from 1992, and here is that knife again. And below it we see a knife that looks like a standard Spartan without toothpick or tweezers. Here we've got what looks to be like a gourmet setup, just one layer, two blades, and a corkscrew. All of these knives are given as 3.5 inches. Like the older one that I just showed you. But Victorinox, they had 91 millimeters and 84 millimeters, and that's more like 3 3/8, and then for the 84, and then the 91's more like 3 5/8. So I'm not really sure these were 3.5 inches. I can't imagine Victorinox making a separate frame, a separate line of size of knives, just to contract with Henckels. But if they are 91 millimeter, then that's kind of strange, because I thought the Gourmet was an 84 millimeter knife. Maybe somebody can help me with that. This also is a little interesting to me. Here is a 3-layer knife, the standard tool set, and the third layer is comprised only of a fish scaler ruler. And that generally on Victorinox knives appears with scissors or wood saw or a combination of other tools. So I don't know if that's a unique tool combination for Henckels branded knives, but if it was, it would be very interesting and maybe collectible. And then here we do have the fish scaler with the scissors. It's not the Fisherman because it doesn't have the Phillips, right? So I guess maybe an early version of the Angler with the corkscrew. And then finally, scissors wood saw corkscrew, that would be the Huntsman, similar to the Huntsman. So, you know, I don't think Victorinox or Swiss Army knife collectors ought to dismiss these knives out of hand because, first of all, they are Victorinox knives, and you might be able to find some unique tool combinations there. I don't know, we'd have to look into it a little more. I don't know that this was all of the models that were offered under the Henckels brand, or this is just a couple of pages of many more models. I don't know. I do know, however, that, you know, these, not being made since 1975, are getting a little hard to find, and they are a very high quality knife, and they come from a company that traces its origins all the way back to 1731, a lot further back than Victorinox. So I think that makes these very collectible and interesting too. Okay, so that's been an in-depth look at two J.A. Henckels Swiss Army knife style knives, one a little older, one a little more recent, both vintage and both very collectible. Thanks for watching.